Doug Ramseur, R-A-M-S-E-U-R. This is Emily Hasbrook, E-M-I-L-E-E, H-A-S-B-R-O-U-C-K. We're with the Ram Law Firm in Richmond, Virginia. And we are happy that the jury saw what we saw through all of this, which was that Wavy Jones was innocent of these charges from the get-go. He's been put through 18 months of hell of being wrongfully charged because he came to work to do his job to try to help people. And unfortunately, for the past 18 months, we've had to suffer the slings and arrows of distortions, intentional misrepresentations to the press from people who had 8.5 million reasons to sell a different version of this than what the truth was. And we were not able to respond to it because we're prohibited from making comments that could influence a jury pool, unlike other people who have interest in this case. And we came into that courtroom over these past 4 days, and we showed how the narrative that's been put out about this is completely wrong. We demonstrated it, we took it head on with what the facts and that video showed, what the witnesses said, what the science here says, and that jury saw every bit of it. 12 people from this community took 20 minutes to decide that this case is not what it has been told that it is throughout. And we're very thankful for those jurors, right, that they saw through this and were able to do it. But an innocent man, if he hadn't had the resources to be able to go and do this. And I want to thank the agency for Central State Hospital, the Department of Behavioral Health and Development Services, and Commissioner Nelson Smith, who gave their support to a low-level employee who got wrongfully charged with murder. And they said, you know what, he was a state employee and we're going to make sure he gets representation so they can come in and prove this and prove that he was wrongfully charged. And we're able to do that. So we are happy with the jury's verdict. I want to be clear that we are never been trying to blame Mr. Otieno for what happened to him. His death is certainly a tragic loss to his family, to the people who loved him, right, and to his ability to contribute to our community larger than that. Mr. Jones mourns for the loss of Mr. Otieno as well, and was very sorrowful and sad through all of this. But that doesn't mean that we need to compound that tragedy with wrongfully convicting Wavy Jones, who didn't do anything wrong. And this jury saw that when we told them for that way. We put on science and evidence to show that unfortunately Mr. Otieno came in with a pre-existing heart condition that put him at high risk for someone who then has been off of his medication for weeks, so not sleeping for 6 days, manic, overweight, high blood pressure, and when he puts himself under that kind of stress by constantly resisting against officers, the people who are trying to help him get the help he needs, that can trigger a sudden cardiac attack. That's what the experts said. Thank you. We're happy to take any questions that you have.
Mr. Ramseur, are you saying that the Department of Behavioral Health and Development paid for your services?
I'm saying they were very supportive of our efforts here to help one of their state employees.
Can you answer if they did?
You know, what I'll say is we felt their support throughout this whole thing. From the agency, from even the folks at Central State Hospital who were involved, who came in here bravely. They have been accused of a lot of wrongdoing. This whole agency, that whole hospital has been accused of wrongdoing throughout. And they all, I appreciate your question.
Did you mean support as in like financial support from the Behavioral Health Department?
No, I meant what I said, which is just giving us support, right? There are a lot of things that you have to have access to get to talk to in hospitals like this, to work with employees that are there, and they made sure that we were able to work with the people we needed and be in contact with the people we needed, and we're always there to help support because they understood that Mr. Jones was an employee of theirs at the time, and that's how they stand by their employees, and we're appreciative of that.
So not financially, just to be clear.
I've given you the answer I'm going to give for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do want to ask because the original prosecutor in this case was, as you know, Ann Baskerville, and she came out very soon after Otieno's death with second-degree murder charges. Obviously, we've seen that reduced now, acquitted for your client. Was that decision 18 months ago, in your opinion, a drastic one or an extreme decision, in your opinion?
Both extreme and drastic. Ms. Baskerville, frankly, made the wrong decision. We knew it at the time. The people involved knew at the time. There's a rush to judgment that was made based on a lack of information, right? If you recall the testimony here from the medical examiner, she had already begun to think this was positional asphyxiation before she ever had the testing back, before she had toxicology results back, before she had histology results back. They had decided this was the case. And Ms. Baskerville decided in her rush to judgment to bring charges 10 days after this event happened. I think it was a week. It was 7 days after this happened that she decided to do it by criminal information, which never happens. Didn't even bring it in front of a grand jury because she wanted to somehow show that she was getting ahead of the issue and tough, and she rushed to judgment, and they were completely wrong. Let's remember, it's not just Mr. Jones who was wrongfully charged here, okay? There were 9 other people who were trying to help who got charged as well, and there are still 2 pending trial, right? People who've just been trying to do their jobs to help keep people safe, and they are still pending trial, wrongfully charged in this matter.
What do you think this decision, how do you think that could impact the 2 defendants left to be on trial in this case?
Should.
It should certainly send a pretty strong signal that this community, when people looked at the evidence, not just the narrative that was being told in the press, right, that isn't being tested and questioned and checked out, right? Look, it's understandable that when people have suffered a loss, we all want to feel for them. But that doesn't mean we can't question some of what's happened here and what the real truth is that's happened here, and it hasn't happened yet until we were able to come here this week and do that. And this was a systematic dismantling of this story that had been created before, right? Don't think for a second that, like, well, this was just a tough verdict one way or another. 20-minute jury verdict for them to come out. Those jurors saw it, right? And they saw exactly there was nothing here.
If you feel comfortable sharing what were some things that Mr. Jones said when the verdict was announced that he was not guilty?
He's just very thankful, right? He's been through a lot. He's been very emotional. It's been hard on him for 18 months. It's hard to find work when someone thinks you're charged with murder, right? Hard to find a place that'll keep you and do that. It's hard to figure out your life when you have that pending over you. For the longest time, you have to remember, Mr. Jones was charged with second-degree murder, right? And to have that hanging over him, an intentional murder charge, makes it very hard for you to be in society when your picture is being shown all over the news, constantly in the media, by people who have lots of reasons to want to tell their story, and they're maligning him. They're trying to threaten him with further prosecution. They're asking the federal government to come in and charge him with offenses. They're upset when his charges got reduced to involuntary manslaughter and rush out to tell their own narrative and story about how that's wrong and an injustice, when the injustice is that he was charged at all. And so he has suffered more than just being in this courtroom even. His whole life has been ripped upside down. And so he is glad to have a few minutes that he can finally breathe. They can finally relax and know that he's going to be home with his family.
How did your all's case change when he became the only hospital employee who was charged, being singled out kind of in that group? How did that change your all's argument?
So you need to understand that the prosecutor chose to try our case first. She made a strategic decision with regards to the cases because they believed, and she said this to court, that their case against our client was the strongest, that they had the best case against our client. And that's why it was maneuvered so we would be the first to trial. And this is what happened to the strongest case they had. It should inform something. I hope it will.
Mr. Renzer, you mentioned that Sedarius Williams had an immunity agreement. How did you know that? And can you share, that's news to a lot of us.
So it's actually kind of interesting that none of us knew on the defense side that he had an immunity agreement at the time his charges were dropped. Ms. Baskerville, right, who initially rushed to charge this case, apparently we knew that she dropped charges against 2 Central State. It was, gosh, I feel like almost a year at least after that before we learned that they'd been given these immunity agreements as well, and it was shocking to us that that was the case. The question really is, why would they need immunity? Those guys didn't do anything wrong either, right? I don't blame, someone who themselves was charged with second-degree murder and did what they could to try to, look after themselves with that kind of threat that was there, right? They didn't need immunity for anything because they didn't do anything wrong, but they felt pressured and forced for those kinds of things. Now that happened under Ms. Baskerville's administration, right? That those decisions were made. But I wish that we'd never been in a situation where he was forced to come to trial to say something that I think clearly didn't match the facts of the case.
Can you say more about the 8.5 million reasons thing you said earlier? That's money that went to the family, and you're saying they had a reason to put the narrative out there. Why did you say that?
I said what I said. I didn't mean anything other than exactly what I said.
I do want to ask because I believe the prosecution may have tried to enter this into evidence in the courtroom, but it was mentioned during a brief press conference with a family friend right before you came. They alleged that Mr. Jones was fired the next day for beating up a patient.
Yeah, that's great. I'm so glad you asked, because that's another one of the lies that's being told here. Okay? It is a outright lie. Mr. Jones was not fired from Central State Hospital. In fact, the morning before this happened with Mr. Otieno, Mr. Jones had given his 2 weeks notice because he was looking, he'd found another job somewhere. And he was concerned sometimes about the danger that could happen at Central State Hospital and was looking for maybe something that was a little less dangerous for his family. So he gave his 2 weeks notice. And the people he worked with were sad to see him go. And then this incident happened, right? And the next day he continued to do his job, which requires dangerous things that happen with dangerous inmates that are there. And another inmate attacked a nurse, right? Another patient at Central Hospital attacked a nurse, and Mr. Jones stepped in, and so there was a physical alteration because Mr. Jones was, again, acting in self-defense to protect a nurse who had been attacked. Then that's why he left Central Hospital, because he resigned, right? Now, you should know, because of these charges, the next job he had waiting, they took back from him. And he lost that next job and was out of work for a long time as a result of those decisions that were made. But they're not true, right? There have been distortions through this from people who have, again, their own advocacy reasons for doing things. We've seen public advocacy groups come out and talk and try to make this case a poster child somehow for mental health reform. We're not saying there aren't mistakes or things that could be done better in our system, and we're very sympathetic to the plight of the mentally ill. That's what Mr. Jones was doing when he worked there, was trying to help those people in that situation. But he's not the cause of those things. He didn't do it then, right? And he shouldn't bear the blame for any of it, for how that is. And somehow they've tried to make this case seem like things were done. The people, everyone in that room that day in Central State Hospital was trying to help Mr. Otieno. They were there because they wanted to get him medical treatment. They wanted to help him become the person who he was when he took medicine that he'd not been on for 2 weeks. That's what they were there for, not to hurt him.
Was Mr. Jones given that option of immunity, to your knowledge, like the other two?
Never. Mr. Jones was never offered a plea agreement. We never considered one. He was not guilty, and we knew that from the beginning.